Right now, your brain is processing more information in a single day than your great-grandparents processed in their entire lifetime. And it was never built for this. Daniel Levitin, a neuroscientist who used to be a sound engineer for bands like Stevie Wonder, discovered exactly why your brain feels like it's drowning, and more importantly, exactly what to do about it. Think about what you have already done today. You woke up and checked your phone, notifications from overnight, news headlines, messages you need to respond to, a work email that technically isn't urgent, but feels urgent because it arrived at 2 a.m. You scrolled. Maybe you didn't even decide to scroll. Your thumb just moved. Then breakfast and more decisions. What to eat, what to wear, whether you're running late, a podcast or silence, traffic or the back road. And all of that happened before most people have finished their first cup of coffee. Your brain handled every one of those moments, and it is exhausted in ways you cannot fully see. That exhaustion is not a personal failure. It is not a productivity problem you can solve with a better morning, routine, or a shinier planner. It is a neurological reality, a structural mismatch between the brain you were born with and the world you live in right now. And Daniel Levitin spent years inside that problem, as a scientist, as a musician, as a person who, by his own admission, found himself overwhelmed by the same forces. He was studying, and he came out the other side with something rare, a map. That map is the organized mind, thinking straight in the age of information overload. Who is Daniel Levitin, and why should you trust him on this? He is not a self-help author who woke up one day with a system to sell you. He is a professor of psychology and behavioral neuroscience at McGill University. He has published research on how the brain processes music, sound, and pattern recognition. But before any of that, before the labs and the papers and the faculty appointments, he was in studios. He worked as a sound engineer and producer with musicians like Stevie Wonder, Blue Oyster Cult, and Steely Dan. He understood rhythm before he understood neurons. He understood the relationship between signal and noise before he had the scientific vocabulary to name it. That combination matters more than it might seem, because the problem of information overload is fundamentally a problem of signal versus noise. Which signals does your brain pay attention to? Which does it filter out? Which does it store and which does it discard? A musician who became a neuroscientist is uniquely positioned to answer that question, because in music, the entire art form is about what you choose to include and what you choose to leave out. Silence is as important as sound. Restraint creates clarity. The same principle, Levitin argues, applies to your mind. The book's central claim is this: your brain has a finite amount of attentional resources. That is not a metaphor. It is a measurable neurological fact. And the modern world, the apps, the notifications, the open plan offices, the 24-hour news cycle, the emails that arrive at midnight, was not designed with those limits in mind. It was designed to compete for your attention constantly, to keep you engaged, alert, reactive, and when everything is urgent, nothing can be important. The book is organized around 4 major areas where this problem plays out and where real solutions exist. The first is attention itself, how it works, why it breaks down, and what the science says about protecting it. The second is memory, not just why you forget things, but why the right response to forgetting is not to try harder to remember. The third is decision-making, how choices drain the brain, and why the people who seem to make the best decisions are often the ones who make the fewest. And the fourth is the organization of physical and digital space, your home, your desk, your inbox, and how the clutter around you is doing something to your brain. You almost certainly underestimate. We are going to move through all of it, methodically, with the science, the research, and the practical implications of each piece. Let's begin. The brain that cannot keep up. Your brain is approximately 1.4 kilograms of tissue. It runs on roughly 20 watts of power, about the same as a dim light bulb, and for the vast majority of human history, it was spectacularly well suited to the world it lived in. That world had information, of course. Sounds in the forest, the smell of smoke, the position of the sun, the expression on a tribesman's face, social dynamics, seasonal patterns, the knowledge of which plants were safe and which were not. That was not a simple world, but it was a bounded one. Information arrived in manageable quantities. Threats were physical and immediate. Rewards were concrete. The signals your brain needed to track were few enough that your attentional system could handle them with something to spare. Now consider today. Levitin cites research showing that the average person processes the equivalent of about 174 newspapers worth of information every single day. Not reads, processes, sees, hears, decides whether to engage with, and either stores or discards. That number has increased roughly fivefold in the last 30 years alone. Your brain's hardware did not get 5 times more powerful. The circuitry you are running today is, for all practical purposes, the same circuitry your ancestors ran 10,000 years ago. That is the mismatch. That is the root of everything. How does the brain manage information under these conditions? It uses filters. Attentional filters are among the most elegant and important systems in your entire nervous system. They are not located in one place. They involve a network of regions, including the prefrontal cortex, the thalamus, and structures deep in the brainstem. But their function is unified: to decide constantly and rapidly what deserves conscious awareness and what can be safely ignored. These filters are extraordinarily good at their job when operating in the environment they evolved for. A sudden sound in a quiet forest, a change in light, an unexpected movement at the edge of your visual field. These are the kinds of signals the attentional filter was built to catch. Occasional, high stakes, embedded in an otherwise calm informational background. Now ask yourself what your phone does. Every notification, every ping, buzz, banner, red badge, and chime is engineered to look exactly like the kind of signal your attentional filter is built to catch. Sudden, unexpected, potentially important. Your nervous system cannot tell the difference between a notification that a colleague liked your post and the crack of a branch. That might mean a predator is close. Both trigger the same orienting response. Both pull your attention away from wherever it was and redirect it toward the source of the signal. The difference is what happens next. In the forest, the signal either resolves, it was just the wind, or it escalates into something that demands full engagement. Either way, the episode ends and your attention returns to baseline. With a phone, the signal never fully resolves. You check the notification, then you see the one below it, then you scroll for 30 seconds. Then someone else messages. Then you remember the email you forgot to answer. There is no baseline to return to, because the next signal is already arriving before your nervous system has finished processing the last one. This is not a willpower failure. This is your ancient hardware being systematically exploited by modern software. And then there is multitasking. Almost everyone believes they can do it. Almost everyone is wrong. Does multitasking save time? No. Studies show that task switching, which is what multitasking actually is, can cost up to 40% of your productive time. You are not doing 2 things at once. You are doing both things badly. The brain cannot genuinely focus on 2 cognitively demanding tasks simultaneously. What it can do is switch between them extremely rapidly, and that switching has a cost every single time it happens. Neuroscientists call it switch cost, or task switching cost, and it is paid in 3 currencies: time, accuracy, and energy. When you move your attention from writing a report to answering a message to checking a headline and back to the report, your prefrontal cortex has to re-establish context each time. It has to reload, essentially, and retrieve where you were, what you were doing, what the relevant background information was. That reloading takes time you do not notice, because it is happening beneath conscious awareness. But it accumulates. The 40% figure is not an exaggeration. It is a conservative estimate from controlled research conditions. What makes this worse is that people who consider themselves the best multitaskers are, the research suggests, often the worst at it. They are more easily distracted, less able to filter irrelevant information, and more likely to confuse which task they were in the middle of when they switch back. The confidence is inverted. The people who feel most comfortable juggling multiple streams of input are precisely the people who are most harmed by doing so. And interruptions deserve their own moment here, because the cost is larger than most people realize. A single interruption, someone stopping by your desk, a notification pulling your eye, a sound from the next room, does not just cost you the seconds it takes to deal with it. Research by Gloria Mark at the University of California, Irvine, found that after an interruption, it takes an average of 23 minutes to return to the same depth of focus you had before. 23 minutes per interruption. Think about how many interruptions you experience in a typical workday. The math becomes uncomfortable very quickly. You may be experiencing something like full focus for a cumulative total of minutes each day while believing you are working for hours. This is not a motivation problem. It is a neuroscience problem. And recognizing it as a neuroscience problem is the first step toward doing something real about it. Understanding why your attention breaks down is step one. But the real shift happens when you understand how memory actually works, and why trying to remember more is exactly the wrong strategy. That is next. Understand how memory actually works. Here is a question most people get wrong. How much can your brain hold in working memory at one time? The famous answer, which you may have heard, is 7, give or take 2. The magical number 7, plus or minus 2, was proposed by cognitive psychologist George Miller in 1956 and became one of the most cited findings in all of psychology. It appeared in textbooks for decades. It is still repeated today in productivity articles and TED Talks, and it has been substantially revised by more recent research. How many things can your working memory actually hold at once? Research now suggests the answer is closer to 3 to 4 items, not 7. And when those items are complex, when they involve multiple attributes or require you to hold relationships between things in mind, the number drops even further. Your working memory, the cognitive workspace where you hold and manipulate information in real time, is smaller than you thought. Considerably smaller. This matters enormously for how you understand your daily experience. Working memory, as we just established, can hold 3 to 4 items. When you ask it to hold 5, 6, 8 things, you create what Levitin calls cognitive overhead, a persistent, background processing load that consumes mental energy without producing visible output. The alternative is what researchers and philosophers sometimes call the extended mind. The idea, developed by philosophers Andy Clark and David Chalmers and extended significantly by cognitive scientists like Edwin Hutchins, is that cognition does not happen entirely inside your skull. Your mind genuinely extends into the tools and environments you use to think. A calendar is not a reminder of what your brain already knows. It is part of the cognitive system itself. A to-do list is not a substitute for memory. It is memory, offloaded onto a more reliable medium. Your brain was designed to use the environment as memory storage. That is not a weakness. That is a feature. Hunter-gatherers use the landscape itself as a memory system, the location of water, the behavior of animals, the seasonal patterns of plants, encoded into the environment and retrieved contextually. Modern humans use notebooks, apps, designated spots for keys, and labeled containers. The principle is identical. When you put your keys in the same place every single time, you are not being obsessive. You are being neurologically intelligent. You are freeing your working memory from having to hold key location as an active item. But there is something even more fundamental at play here, and it goes by the name of a Polish-Lithuanian psychologist who worked in the early 20th century, Bluma Zeigarnik. The Zeigarnik effect describes something you have certainly experienced, but may not have had a name for. Unfinished tasks occupy your brain in a way that finished tasks do not. When you leave something incomplete, a conversation you need to have, a bill you need to pay, an email you have been meaning to write, your brain does not file it away quietly and wait. It keeps the loop open. It returns to it repeatedly, like a tongue returning to a sore tooth. You will think about the unfinished task in the shower. You will think about it while trying to fall asleep. You will think about it in the middle of a different task, which interrupts that task and adds it to the list of things you have not finished. This is not a personal quirk. It is a neurological mechanism that evolved to help you complete things. You started because in an ancestral environment, leaving a task unfinished could have serious consequences. The fruit you started gathering, the shelter you began constructing, your brain evolved to nag you until it was done. The problem is that in a modern environment, you may have dozens of open loops at any given time. The Zeigarnik effect scales with your task list. Every incomplete item consumes a small amount of background processing. Collectively, they create a persistent hum of mental noise that is exhausting and distracting, and impossible to silence through willpower alone. The solution Levitin advocates, drawing on research and his own experience, is both simple and counterintuitive. You do not close open loops by finishing the tasks. You close them by writing them down. Specifically, by writing them down in a trusted system that you know you will actually review. The act of writing a task in a place you trust tells your brain that the item is captured. The loop does not need to stay open for retrieval purposes. It is stored externally now. Research shows that when people write down their pending tasks and have a specific plan for when they will address them, The intrusive thoughts associated with those tasks largely stop, not because the tasks are done, but because the brain's tracking system has been satisfied that the item will not be lost. This is why a simple notebook or a well-maintained task application is not a productivity gimmick. It is a neurological tool that reduces the cognitive overhead your brain is carrying at any given moment. The act of writing things down is not a sign of poor memory. It is evidence of understanding how memory actually works. Memory systems help. The extended mind, trusted capture systems, designated physical locations for important items, all of these are genuine cognitive tools that reduce the burden on a working memory that was never designed to carry everything you're asking it to carry. But there is a deeper problem hiding underneath all of this, a drain that is relentless and largely invisible. It involves the sheer number of decisions you make every single day, and that number might shock you. Sukanwam decision fatigue, the hidden drain. Here is a number, 35,000. That is the estimated number of decisions the average adult makes in a single day. Some researchers put the figure lower, some put it higher. But even the conservative estimates are staggering. Most of those decisions are small. What to eat? What to click, whether to respond, which route to take, how to phrase a sentence. But small does not mean free. Every decision, regardless of its stakes, draws from the same finite pool of mental resources. This is decision fatigue. And unlike the kind of fatigue you feel in your muscles after exercise, you cannot always feel it in real time. Decision fatigue is insidious because it does not announce itself. Your brain does not send you a clear signal that says, "Warning, I am now making poor choices because I am cognitively depleted." Instead, it simply starts making those poor choices quietly, while you continue to believe you are operating at full capacity. The evidence for this is striking and comes from unexpected places. Why do judges give harsher sentences late in the day? This is not a hypothetical or a thought experiment. Researchers studying parole board decisions in Israel found that prisoners who appeared before the board in the first session of the day received favorable rulings roughly 65% of the time. Prisoners who appeared late in the day, after the board had made dozens of sequential decisions, received favorable rulings near 0% of the time. Same cases, same legal standards, same board members, different time of day, different mental state, dramatically different outcomes. The pattern was not explained by the severity of the crime. It was not explained by the prisoner's record. It was explained by cognitive depletion. When the mental effort required to make a careful, nuanced judgment is no longer available, the brain defaults to the safe, easy, effort-minimal option. In a courtroom, the safe default is to deny parole, to maintain the status quo, to not take a risk. So it did. Thousands of times over in the data. This is not unique to judges. It is universal. Doctors order more unnecessary tests later in the day because they are more likely to default to the path of least resistance. Shoppers make less considered purchases at the end of a long trip. Managers make less thoughtful personnel decisions in the late afternoon. The mechanism is the same everywhere, deliberate. High-quality decision-making requires cognitive resources, and those resources deplete with use. Now consider the paradox of choice. Why does a grocery store with fewer jam options sell more jam than one with dozens of options? This is the famous jam study conducted by psychologists Sheena Iyengar and Mark Lepper. When researchers set up a display with 24 varieties of jam, it attracted more browsers than a display with 6 varieties. But the 6-variety display generated 10 times more purchases, 10 times. More choices produced fewer decisions, not more, because too many choices create anxiety, and anxiety blocks decisions entirely. Levitin frames this through the lens of the brain's resource economy. Every additional option you present to the brain requires evaluation, and evaluation has a cost. When that cost exceeds the cognitive resources available, the brain's response is to disengage entirely, to walk away, to put off the decision, to do nothing. This is not irrationality. It is a rational response to resource scarcity. But it means that in a world of infinite choice, the brain is constantly being asked to spend more than it has. The modern marketplace understands this, even if your own daily decision-making does not. This is why streaming services that recommend a specific show for you do better than platforms that simply show you a wall of options. This is why subscription boxes that curate choices for you have carved out a real commercial niche. This is why some restaurants choose to have shorter menus. The reduction in choice is a service. It is handling the decision for you at a moment when your brain's decision-making budget is already overdrawn. How do the people who seem to make the best decisions actually do it? They make fewer of them. They design their lives to reduce the number of decisions that require active deliberation. This is not laziness, it is strategic. Preservation of cognitive resources for the decisions that genuinely matter. Barack Obama, during his presidency, famously wore only gray or blue suits. Mark Zuckerberg has spoken about wearing the same style of clothes each day. Steve Jobs had his uniform. These are not people who cannot afford variety or who lack imagination. These are people who recognize that clothing decisions, made daily, accumulated into a meaningful cognitive load, and who decided that load was not worth paying when the resources it consumed were needed elsewhere. Removing the decision meant those resources were available for decisions that were actually important. The principle extends far beyond wardrobe. Routines are decision elimination systems. When you exercise at the same time every day without deliberating about whether to go, you have removed the decision from your daily cognitive budget. When you eat the same breakfast on weekdays without choosing each morning, you have removed another decision. When you pay bills on automatic, batch your errands into one trip. Decide in advance which meetings will always be in person and which will always be remote. Each of these reduces the number of active choices your brain must make, and the cognitive resources freed up by those eliminations become available for work that requires genuine mental engagement. David Allen, whose Getting Things Done methodology Levitin references extensively, introduced what has become known as the 2-minute rule. If a task will take less than 2 minutes to complete, do it immediately. Do not add it to a list, do not schedule it, do not deliberate about when you will address it. The rule eliminates the decision of when to do it. By making the answer automatic, the answer is always now, and by eliminating that downstream decision-making, it also prevents the task from becoming an open, zygarnic loop that will consume background processing until it is resolved. The deeper principle behind all of these strategies is the same. The goal is not to improve your in-the-moment decision-making, though that matters. The goal is to reduce the total number of decisions that require in-the-moment deliberation in the first place. Design the system so the right behavior is the default. Make the good choice the easy choice. Eliminate the need for willpower wherever possible, because willpower is itself a finite resource that depletes exactly as cognitive resources deplete. Levitin is careful to note that this does not mean rigidity. It does not mean optimizing every moment or reducing life to an algorithm. It means reserving your sharpest thinking for the problems that deserve it. It means protecting the cognitive space, where your best work happens by not filling that space with the cognitive residue of 100 trivial choices. It means understanding that the brain you have is extraordinary, but finite, and working with its limits rather than against them. Every expert in this space, from neuroscientists to behavioral economists, to the most productive people in their fields, arrives at the same counterintuitive conclusion. Doing less, choosing less, and deciding less is often the path to thinking more clearly and acting more wisely. All of this happens inside your head. In your neurons, your working memory, your attentional filters, your prefrontal cortex managing the daily impossible task of running a 21st century life on a Paleolithic brain. But Levitin's most practical chapters are about something outside your head, your actual physical and digital space, because it turns out that clutter in your home and chaos in your inbox are not just aesthetically unpleasant. They are silently draining the same mental resources we have spent this entire first part discussing. That is exactly where part 2 picks up. Script continues in part 2, organizing your physical space. Look around you right now. Whatever room you are in, your office, your bedroom, your kitchen, your brain is not simply seeing that room. It is processing it. Every object on that desk, every pile on that counter, every item that does not have a designated home is being registered, catalogued and subtly tracked by your visual and attentional systems. You are not consciously aware of this process. That is precisely what makes it so expensive. Daniel Levitin is unambiguous on this point. Visual clutter is not an aesthetic problem. It is a cognitive one. When neuroscientists study people working in cluttered versus organized environments, the results are not subtle. Cluttered environments elevate cortisol, the brain's primary stress hormone. They increase sustained distraction. They fragment attention. The effect is not dramatic in any single moment, but over the course of a day, it accumulates into something that looks exactly like fatigue, because that is precisely what it is. Here is a question worth sitting with. Why does a messy desk make you less productive? Even if you genuinely know where everything is, the answer reveals something important about how attention actually works. Your brain is not simply responding to things you consciously direct it toward. It is running a continuous, parallel background scan of everything in your visual field, even the objects you are not actively using. Every item registers as a potential claim on attention. Every pile triggers an unconscious question: does this require something from me? The answer may be no, but the asking still has a cost. Your working memory, that narrow, 7-item spotlight, does not get to simply ignore the stack of unfiled papers on your left. It spends a small, but real fraction of its capacity, quietly confirming they are still irrelevant. Do that 10,000 times a day, and the cost is no longer small. This is why the principle Levitin calls a home for everything is not organizational perfectionism. It is cognitive hygiene. When every object in your environment has a designated location, not a general area, but a specific consistent place, your brain no longer needs to track it. The question, "Where is my passport?" disappears from the attentional cue entirely, because the answer is already preloaded and fixed. The decision was made once, and it never needs to be made again. That is the deeper efficiency of an organized physical space. It converts recurring micro-decisions into permanent rules. Levitin offers practical guidance here that is both straightforward and easy to underestimate. The junk drawer, for instance, is not the enemy of organization. It is a legitimate category. Every household and office generates miscellaneous items that do not fit neat taxonomies. Fighting this reality creates more friction than accepting it. The solution is not to eliminate the junk drawer, but to contain it. One drawer clearly bounded, understood by everyone who uses the space. What destroys organization is not the existence of miscellaneous items. It is miscellaneous items spread across every surface, masquerading as temporary until temporary becomes permanent. Important documents deserve their own system, and Levitin is specific about why. The cost of losing an important document, passport, tax record, insurance policy, is not merely the inconvenience of replacement. It is the anxiety of not knowing whether you can replace it. That anxiety, like all unresolved loops, occupies background processing space for days or weeks. The solution is a physical filing system with categories fixed in advance. Legal documents in one folder, financial records in another, medical information in a third. The categories do not need to be elaborate. They need to be consistent and trusted. Once the system exists and you know it works, the anxiety evaporates, not because the documents became less important, but because your brain no longer needs to monitor them. Why do organized people seem to have more time? It is not that their days contain more hours. It is that they spend essentially zero mental energy on the question, "Where is X?" And that energy, instead of evaporating into 100 trivial searches, flows toward work that actually matters. Time is partly a function of energy, and energy is partly a function of how much cognitive background noise you are carrying. Organized people are not more disciplined by temperament. They have built environments that generate less noise. The deeper neuroscience behind this involves the brain's natural drive toward categorization. Your brain does not process the world as a continuous stream of unique, unrelated items. It groups, classifies, and chunks information into patterns because patterns require less ongoing processing than raw data. When your physical environment mirrors this categorical tendency, the brain's work becomes easier. When your environment is organized by category, tools here, documents there, daily use items at arm's reach, archival items out of sight, perception aligns with how the brain already wants to organize the world. The system reinforces the cognition rather than fighting it. Physical clutter is one battle, but for most people today, the bigger battle happens on a screen: email, notifications, endless browser tabs, the relentless pulse of the digital world, arriving at all hours, through every device you own. And what Levitin discovered about digital overload might be the most important section in this entire book. Because it targets a cognitive vulnerability most people do not even know they have: the digital avalanche. There is a number worth knowing. The average person checks their smartphone between 80 and 150 times per day, depending on the study. That is roughly once every 6 to 10 minutes during waking hours. Most of those checks are not prompted by a specific need. They are habitual, reflexive, and each one, every single one, has a measurable cognitive cost that most people are entirely unaware of paying. Here is the question almost every person in a modern office has privately wondered: Why does checking email constantly make you feel productive, while actually making you less productive? The answer is the concept of context switching, which we explored in part 1, but its application in the digital environment is worth examining with precision. Every time you shift your attention from a task to your inbox or your messages, your brain does not simply pause the first task and pick it up again cleanly. It incurs a switching cost, the time and energy required to disengage from the first task, engage the new one, process whatever you found there, and then navigate back to where you were. Researchers at the University of California, Irvine, found that after an interruption, it takes an average of 23 minutes for a worker to fully return to a task. 23 minutes. If you check your email 7 times during a 4-hour work block, you have mathematically eliminated the possibility of doing deep, focused work during that block entirely. Why does this feel productive? Because email has a variable reward structure. Sometimes you open your inbox and find something genuinely important, sometimes something urgent, sometimes something flattering. The unpredictability of that reward, the fact that you never know until you look, is exactly what makes the checking behavior so resistant to extinction. Behaviorally, it mirrors the structure of a slot machine. The same dopaminergic circuitry that evolved to motivate our ancestors toward food and social bonding has been quietly co-opted by notification systems, designed by engineers whose professional incentive is to maximize the number of times you tap that screen. Levitin's proposed alternative to constant email monitoring is batched processing. Rather than treating email as a continuous stream to be monitored in real time, you treat it as a distinct task to be executed at designated intervals, twice a day for some people, 3 times for others. The specific interval matters less than the discipline of maintaining it. What batching accomplishes is a structural elimination of context switching. Your deep work periods are protected not by willpower, not by trying to ignore the pull of the inbox, but by a system that removes the decision entirely. The inbox is closed. The browser tab is not open. There is nothing to resist because the temptation has been designed out of the environment. The inbox zero philosophy has become popular enough to have spawned a minor cultural obsession, but Levitin's analysis suggests that zero is the wrong target. The goal is not an empty inbox. The goal is an inbox that does not occupy background cognitive processing. These are different objectives. An empty inbox achieved through frantic, compulsive processing throughout the day may generate more anxiety than a well-managed inbox that contains 100 items but is checked only twice. The metric that matters is not the count. It is the mental weight. Now consider what a notification actually does to your brain. Not the content of the notification. The notification itself, the buzz, the badge, the chime. Research by researchers at Florida State University found that merely receiving a notification, even without checking it, is sufficient to disrupt ongoing task performance. To a degree comparable to answering a phone call, your brain registers the signal. It generates an urge to check, and even if you successfully override that urge, the override itself consumed attentional resources, and a small fragment of your focus has been directed away from the original task. The notification badge sitting on your email icon, the red circle with the number inside it, is not a neutral piece of information, sitting passively until you need it. It is a claim on attention. It is a demand dressed as a choice. This is not accidental. Levitin is careful to make this point without suggesting conspiracy, but the mechanism is clear. The notification systems of modern technology are engineered to exploit a neurological circuit that evolved for genuine emergencies. The jolt of alertness that a phone buzz produces is the same circuit that once directed our ancestors' attention toward predators and urgent social signals. That circuit is fast, involuntary, and nearly impossible to suppress through intention alone. The solution is not better willpower. The solution is fewer notifications, and Levitin recommends a ruthless audit. For every app on your phone that currently sends you notifications, ask a single question. Has this notification ever produced a genuinely time-sensitive action that could not have waited until a scheduled check? If the answer is no, the notification goes off. This is not asceticism. This is environmental design. There is a related phenomenon Levitin calls ambient awareness, and its costs are subtler but equally real. Even when you are not actively checking your devices, knowing they are present, knowing notifications may be arriving, knowing the inbox is growing, occupies a faint but measurable background process. Studies of people working with their smartphones face down on their desks, compared to people who place their smartphones in another room entirely, show a cognitive performance gap that favors the out-of-room group. The phone is not ringing. It is not displaying anything, but its presence in the visual field is enough to trigger low-level monitoring. And low-level monitoring has low-level costs that add up over an 8-hour workday into something significantly above zero. Digital and physical organization matter enormously. They are the scaffolding within which your cognitive life unfolds. But there is one more layer. Levitin covers that almost nobody discusses openly: how information overload is reshaping not just our individual thinking, but the very fabric of our social world, how we relate to other people, how we maintain relationships, and how organizations function under conditions of cognitive saturation. That is exactly where we go next. The social world and organized thinking. Human beings are social animals in a specific, neurologically precise sense. The brain did not simply evolve to tolerate other people. It evolved to track them, their intentions, their emotions, their reliability, their history with us. This tracking is computationally intensive in ways that cognitive scientists are only beginning to fully appreciate, and it has a capacity limit. The British anthropologist Robin Dunbar proposed, based on the relationship between primate brain size and social group size, that the human brain can maintain meaningful social relationships with approximately 150 people. Not casual acquaintances, meaningful relationships. The kind where you know the person's name and something about their life and feel genuine mutual recognition. This number has come to be called Dunbar's number, and while researchers continue to debate its precise boundaries, the underlying principle is robust. The neocortex has a finite social processing capacity, and that capacity is not infinite. Here is the question that defines the modern social experience. Why do you feel more isolated despite having hundreds, perhaps thousands of connections on social media? The answer is not cynicism about technology. It is neuroscience. Your brain evolved to deeply track around 150 relationships, to maintain a rich internal model of each person's personality, emotional state, and relationship history with you. When you attempt to extend that tracking to thousands of online connections, something breaks. The connections become shallow by necessity. The brain cannot maintain the same depth across that many nodes. What you accumulate is not a larger version of a close social network. It is a fundamentally different kind of network, wide but thin, where the individual connections carry far less cognitive and emotional weight. The result, counterintuitively, is a feeling of isolation, surrounded by names and faces but lacking the deep, mutual knowledge that makes connection feel real. Levitin's discussion here connects back to the concept of cognitive load in a way that is easy to miss but important to understand. Maintaining relationships, real relationships, requires cognitive resources. It requires remembering shared history, tracking emotional states, following through on commitments, and investing sustained attention over time. These are not trivial demands. In an era where our social attention is fragmented across hundreds of weak ties, the deep relationships that require the most cognitive investment are often the ones that get starved of it. We respond to 100 casual social media notifications, while failing to call the friend who genuinely needs to hear from us. Not because we don't care, but because the notifications are immediate, and the phone call requires sustained, undistracted attention that our depleted cognitive resources struggle to supply. Levitin extends these principles beyond individual lives into the design of organizations and institutions. The same cognitive limits that govern individuals govern teams. The same attentional fragmentation that destroys individual focus destroys team productivity. Organizations that pile their employees with constant email demands, back-to-back meetings, and perpetual digital availability are not extracting more cognitive output from those employees. They are systematically destroying the conditions under which high-quality cognitive output is possible. The research here is damning and consistent. Knowledge workers who are given protected periods of focused, uninterrupted work consistently outperform those who are kept in a state of constant availability, even when the total hours worked are equal. This brings Levitin to a concept in decision theory that has profound practical implications. The distinction between satisficing and maximizing. A maximizer, in the language of psychologist Barry Schwartz, is someone who is driven to find the optimal choice, the best option available from the full range of possibilities. A satisficer is someone who establishes a threshold of acceptability and accepts the first option that meets it. Levitin is unambiguous about which approach is healthier and, paradoxically more effective. In a world of near infinite options, streaming services with tens of thousands of titles, online markets with millions of products, careers with thousands of paths, maximizing is a cognitive trap. The more options you consider, the higher the decision cost, and the higher the probability that you will be haunted by the options you did not choose. Maximizers consistently report lower satisfaction with their decisions than satisficers, even when the maximizer's chosen option is objectively better on measurable dimensions. What does this mean practically? It means that decisive people are not people who are indifferent to quality. They are people who have internalized Levitin's deepest principle. Cognitive resources are finite and precious, and spending them on decisions that do not warrant exhaustive analysis is a tax on the decisions that do. The path to better decisions is not longer deliberation on every choice. It is reserving genuine deliberation for the choices that deserve it, and developing the capacity to close the loop quickly on everything else. Satisficing is not settling. It is wisdom about cost. And in a world that has engineered infinite choice into virtually every domain of life, the ability to satisfice gracefully, to decide, commit, and move forward without the corrosive residue of second-guessing, is one of the most genuinely valuable cognitive skills a person can develop. Practical brain hacks, putting it all together. Everything we have covered across this book, attention, memory, decision fatigue, physical clutter, digital overload, social complexity, points toward a single organizing principle. The brain is a magnificent instrument with real, measurable, irreducible constraints. The goal is not to overcome those constraints. The goal is to build systems that make those constraints irrelevant as often as possible. Here is how that actually looks in practice. The junk drawer principle, applied to your entire life, is more powerful than it sounds. The insight is this: instead of fighting the existence of miscellaneous, hard to categorize things, tasks, objects, commitments, ideas, designate a specific container for them. One physical drawer, one digital folder, one list. The category called miscellaneous is not a failure of organization. It is a category like any other. What causes cognitive chaos is not the existence of miscellaneous items. It is miscellaneous items without a home, drifting across your desk, your mind and your calendar, each one quietly demanding attention, because it has nowhere to go and no clear status. Give it a home. Close the loop, move on. Externalize everything your brain does not need to hold. This is perhaps the single most important practical takeaway from Levitin's entire framework. The human brain is a processing system, not a storage system. It was not designed to be a calendar, a to-do list, an address book, and a reminder system simultaneously. Every item you keep in your head that could be written down, calendared, or automated is occupying working memory space that could otherwise be used for thinking. Write it down, immediately, reliably, in a place you trust. The key word is trust. The external system only works if you actually rely on it. Capture the thought, record the commitment, set the reminder, and then let it go. Not because it does not matter, but because your brain no longer needs to monitor it. That is what the system is for. Single tasking is not a productivity gimmick. It is a structural response to how the brain actually allocates attentional resources. As we established earlier in this book, the brain does not multitask, it task switches. And task switching has a measurable cost in time, accuracy, and cognitive depletion. The act of committing to a single task for a defined period, with all competing inputs deliberately closed or silenced, is not about discipline in the moment. It is about designing a working environment where the task switching temptation has been reduced before the work begins. Close the email client, put the phone in another room, block the distracting websites using software that removes the decision entirely. These are not acts of willpower. They are acts of environmental architecture. The 2-minute rule is one of the most cognitively economical habits in Levitin's toolkit. If a task can be completed in 2 minutes or less, do it immediately, rather than adding it to a list. The logic here is subtle but real. Small tasks do not feel small when they become open loops. An unanswered text, a document waiting to be filed, a quick email reply you have been deferring. Each one is an open Zeigarnik loop consuming background processing. The 2-minute rule is not about efficiency in the conventional sense. It is about the cognitive economics of loop closure. Closing small loops immediately is cheaper than maintaining them as persistent background items, even if the task itself seems trivial. Batching similar decisions is a direct application of the decision fatigue research we covered in Part 1. When similar decisions are grouped together and made in a single session. Weekly meal planning. Scheduling the next month's appointments. Processing email in one focused block rather than scattered throughout the day.